Hi everyone, thank you for joining us again. My name is Will Critchlow here at SearchPilot, and I'm joined this time by Patrick Hathaway. Patrick is the co-founder and CEO at Sitebulb, which is a epic crawling software for particularly capable of crawling really large websites, which is where our interests overlap because we've built quite different tools, quite different businesses, but recently especially we've found ourselves collaborating on some shared customers, and we've been bouncing around some ideas on business, SEO, software, customer service, value, pricing, all this stuff. And we thought actually maybe we should have this conversation in public. So that's what we're going to do. So here goes. Thank you, Patrick, for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. I remember the LinkedIn post that I put up about value metrics in SaaS, and nobody engaged with it apart from you, Will, and
It's a niche audience.
and so we had a little back and forth on there about pricing. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how you build different businesses, different SaaS businesses that obviously our tool sets they don't compete with one another.
Mm.
I would say they probably complement, but the way we've gone about building them, as you say, is very different.
Yeah, yeah. And it'll be interesting to see the areas of commonality and the areas where we think differently about this stuff. I think probably what I said, I don't actually remember I remember the post. I don't remember what I said in the comment, but something that I find really interesting about this stuff is obviously pricing is in a sense the output in a way of how do you think about value? What is the value you're bringing? What is the value people are getting? How do they process that value? And I think in SEO especially, this is a really interesting area, and this is the area that I'm probably most interested in your take on. So we'll start here. Is SEO as an industry has kind of grown out of a lot of individual webmasters, people doing their own side projects. There's a lot of people who build their own tools, all this kind of stuff. And I think it's led to a certain kind of attitude of a certain DIY mentality in some areas. And I think there's a journey that a lot of people go on as they start working on bigger websites, whether that's agency side or whether they go in-house, to realize that they're moving the needle. They're moving a big needle. These are big numbers, big revenue numbers, big business metrics for really serious businesses. And that's quite a journey, I think for some people. So let's bring it back and start small. From a Sitebulb perspective, you bring different value to different users and different use cases. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, this has definitely evolved over time. If we go back to the beginning, I suppose when we first started Sitebob, um, I had come across this sort of framework for developing products that you're probably familiar with, called the Jobs to be Done framework,
Yep.
which I guess just in case there isn't anyone listening who doesn't know what that is, it's a sort of approach to building products based on an understanding of what the customer is trying to achieve. And so the goal for Sitebub in the beginning that we thought let's build around this was producing technical website audits, right? So we understood that a lot of the people who might want to use Sitebub would be agencies or consultants, right? And that they were dealing with their clients who a lot of the time they were doing a big technical audit at the start of the engagement,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a deliverable that they needed to give them. So Sitebub, as it's at its core, as it remained as a product today, but when it was built at the time in the beginning, was built around this job. So how do we help people going through this process of producing a deliverable that we can give to a client? Um, and as a result of us building it that way, it meant that it was a really good fit for consultants and for agencies in particular. And I suppose as we've evolved, we've found that there are different customer types or different customer personas that are trying to solve different jobs,
Mm-hmm.
and we as a tool have had to evolve as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you think about that first kind of original core job to be done, there's obviously certain. I mean, we used to run an agency, and obviously we've used Sitewell over the years, but there's certain things that are kind of characteristic, I guess, of that, right? So you're working on multiple clients. You're also working on some websites that aren't even clients yet. I think there's often a pre-sales or like a sales motion element of it, and there's a concern about margins. Services businesses, agencies are not always massively high margin businesses, and so there's a kind of certain cost sensitivity that I guess goes around that. How did you think about all of those dynamics playing out?
Yeah, so I mean, I mean, I completely agree that because you have this sort of agency, essentially a billable hours type model,
Hmm.
you're always thinking about how much time is this consultant spending doing this task to for this client or that client. And we had always thought that if we can build Sitebulb in a way that saves people time. I mean, I feel like that's a bit of a cliche because it's sort of like almost any product you could say, oh, it saves you time. Um, but we were coming when we came into the market in 2016. Everybody had Screaming Frog.
Hmm.
Everybody still got Screaming Frog, right?
Right.
But they were used to this sort of dynamic of here's a load of data. How do you now take that and put that into a report? And so we were really, really keen that we didn't just build another Screaming Frog and that we built something that was measurably different.
Mm.
And so we focused on picking out issues and saying, look, this is maybe an issue over here, this is maybe an issue over here. And actually, when the biggest change we had in Sitebulb, like in terms of adoption and people being successful with the product, is when we added prioritization to our hints. So instead of going, right, there's 90 things wrong with your website, we actually had some direction within the tool to say, okay, yeah, maybe there's 90 things wrong, but only these ones maybe look at first.
Hmm.
And that was always when I was producing website audits for customers, I would always be looking for how do I give them the five most impactful things, uh, and trying to embed that thinking in the product is kind of where we went. And to your point about how do you help agencies not waste time? Um, I think, well, that wasn't exactly what you said, but that's kind of how I probably
Hmm.
paraphrase it. Um, I also think like the other part about it is how do you help um, how do you help agencies more effectively communicate with their clients? Because if they can't effectively communicate with their clients to get anything done, like if nothing gets implemented,
Yeah.
then the agency themselves are not actually adding any value. So that was the other thing that we did was think about how do we help our users communicate with their customers more easily. And so we have this enormous knowledge base on the website, which is sort of supports the software that helps you sort of explain issues. It's stuff you can send to developers. Here's how you would think about this. This is what this means. And again, these sort of things in combination really helped Sitebulb become something that agencies in particular at that time could find value from.
Yeah, yeah, and then it's expanded over time, and part of the reason that we've been talking recently is these shared customers. So that's when it's gone back, or additionally in house, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure the agencies working with these brands are using it as well,
Hmm.
but the brands themselves are using your tool,
Hmm.
and that has a different profile. It feels like, and
Yeah.
I should, I'm talking here about my customers' experience because I've never been in house, but you're dealing with the same website every day, or the same small set of websites every day. You've got a certain kind of backlog of things that are presumably getting done, or or in a queue to be done, and you'll probably start being more concerned about exceptions or things that have changed since you last ran. I don't know. I'm putting words in your mouth, but yeah, how did you think about the jobs to be done changing when it was in-house use?
Yeah, I mean it's exactly that. And what's really interesting is that this isn't just in-house, but it's also how agencies have adapted as I've seen it, is
Mm.
that you are no longer doing this one audit, right? That's
Right.
kind of what it was like,
Hmm.
7, 8 years ago, because websites didn't change that much, and certainly the smaller websites that you dealt with didn't change that much, right? You
Yep.
could do your tech audit, and then right, we don't need to necessarily. We'll give you your recommendations, which you aren't going to do, but you didn't you didn't need to do auditing all the time, and it's now become, you know, our customers are crawling their websites sometimes daily, often weekly, at
Mm.
least monthly. And as you mentioned with the bigger brands that we work with, they're crawling in the millions of URLs, right? You're not going to crawl that every single day. But with a tool like Sitebulb, you can crawl that every single week, depending on how much how much budget you've got to play with, I suppose, and how important it is that you crawl it, everything that regularly. But it's the changes. So from one crawl to the next, like what's regressed or what's improved, and it's also like how do we help understand issues based on templates rather than just issues, standalone issues here. Like
Right.
essentially what's the underlying cause and what's going on with that.
Yeah. Obviously, we think in template terms as well, what we call site sections when we're running tests. And so, yeah, that's obviously one of those areas where we have a lot of overlap. And how do you, one of the areas that I'm very interested in, we'll talk later about your release notes, because anybody who hasn't read them definitely should. But when you're thinking about the features that you are working on or that you want to queue up and release, you already mentioned something that moved the needle in terms of the prioritization. But how do you know, how are you doing the discovery around that? How do you figure out what people are going to find valuable before you've built it, and prioritizing your development queue yourselves?
So I think there's two sides to this, and this is kind of always how we've thought about it, but it's our sort of methodology for this has changed recently. The first thing is what do customers reveal that they want by talking to you? So this is both them actively telling you, can you do this, or what do you want that? Give me this. But also through the pain points that they share with you when you're talking to them. So I do all the sales calls for Sitebulb, so I'm talking with potential customers every single week, and one of the jobs in sales is to dig out what are these pain points, right? What are their objectives? What are they struggling with? Not just like, oh, I have a problem with this tool, right? Then maybe it's a competitor or whatever, but also like just within the business, what things are we working on? What are we struggling with? So there's loads of sort of rich information that you can get from there, which the process that I've taken to recently is basically feeding all this stuff into AI and going, what are these repetitive patterns, right? So go through all my calls, what patterns have we got, and how do they fit for our different personas and different market segments, and then augmenting that with, we run focus groups, right? So we'll go and sit down with customers and say, again, more directly, I suppose, like what specifically do you like, what do you not like, what are you looking to achieve? You can take all of that, feed that all back into to AI as well, and you can end up with this really, really rich list of things to do. And then the other part is what do customers not realize that they need? And so we've always been really keen on this because it's sort of, I suppose, it's probably the most interesting part of product development that for me personally, like what solutions can we come up with that no one's ever thought of before?
Yep.
And I mean, to some extent, I'm maybe putting words in your mouth here, but it feels a little bit like that's what SearchPilot is in its entirety. Like, what is it that people don't realize that they need to do in the first place? And so some of that we'll get just from our own brainstorming, but often we'll do like onboarding calls with customers. So for the like bigger enterprise customers, although we don't do like professional services where we're sort of using the product for them, I suppose, we do sit with them and go through like what's going on with this website that we need to understand how to deal with. And one of our customers recently, they had so many like weird routes that a crawler could possibly take that we developed a whole new way of tackling that with how we instruct the crawler, right? So
Yep.
there's basically it's not even live yet, but it's essentially 2 layers of inclusion and exclusion filters. So you can say, hey, do crawl this or don't crawl this, but then also look for this pattern as well. Like, this is not a feature that exists anywhere else. It's not a feature that anyone would have asked us for, but by looking at the data and looking at the problems that we're having crawling the site with other tools, we realized that actually this solution would be a really efficient way to deal with the problems that they had and what they wanted to do with it.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. The example that springs to my mind, of the things that you've done that are that kind of innovation that wasn't out there in the market beforehand. The first one I remember, I'm going to get the date wrong. I'm going to guess it was 2017 or 2018. Was looking at the link visualizations, the kind of spider chart type. They probably have a better name than that. And I remember including some of those in some of my presentations at the time, because that was in the early days of us trying to run internal linking tests, and I'm still like mystified and curious about internal linking. You've probably done a lot deeper thinking about this. I only just realized as we were prepping for this, by the way, that you've got a maths background, an academic background in maths as well.
I do, yeah.
And the kind of graph theory and that kind of stuff is, well, there's a lot of areas of maths I found where there's like, you can draw a kind of chart of how interesting they get, and they get extremely interesting right before they become utterly impenetrable. And I've always thought that like kind of iterative network algorithms are kind of probably just the wrong side of impenetrable to actually kind of grasp truly intuitively what's going on. But I've always liked your visualizations in those areas.
Yeah. So on that, I mean, I that resonates me with on a number of levels. The crawl maps, which is what we call them, the visualizations, we had stolen from Ian Lurie. He knows this. I've spoken to him about it, and given him lots of credit throughout, because he had been building them with Gephi, I think, taking
Rings a vague bell, actually. Maybe he talked about that like a pro SEO training or something.
Yeah, he did.
A decade before.
Yeah, absolutely right. And but no one had put them in a tool, right?
Okay.
It was sort of a really, really manual process of 95 different steps and 5 different tools to get to this outcome.
Yeah.
And me and Gareth put eyes together and went, how could we build it? And that's where we ended up with it. Specifically when it comes to maths, I do actually remember that moment. So I did a Master of Maths, and in my 4th year we were doing, so I really liked applied, so we were doing a lot of the Einstein field equations and all of the relativity stuff, which I really enjoyed, but I found really at the sort of, the top end of what I could manage. And I remember doing homework. We used to have to do homework. I remember doing homework with this other guy who I was friends with at the time, and we were working through these Einstein field equations, and I was working on page 1, and he was going, "No, Patrick, that can't be right there, because in 5 pages time we're going to need it to be over here." And I was like, that was a realization that, because at that point I'd been considering, should I do a PhD? And he did later go on to do a PhD. And at that point I realized, oh, PhDs are for people like you. This is where I top out, right? And so I did the masters and I stopped there. But this definitely is that level of impenetrable that some people's, it always stuck with me, that moment, because I knew exactly at that moment, I can do this, I can't do that.
Yeah, I read a very interesting, was it an article or was it a podcast episode? I don't know if I'm going to be able to dig it out. I think somebody was talking about the 15 levels or something, and they were claiming that there's all these levels, but you can only see a level or two above your own. And I think that kind of realization that that person you're talking about probably had that realization later with someone else.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way up to like Terence Dow and the elite of the elite. But I think realizing that there's power law relationships in all this stuff, and you can be pretty good and still a long way behind the truly elite.
Yeah.
It's that same thing that I think happens to everyone in their sporting career. You kind of you want to play for England or whatever, and then that you get disabused of that notion. But some people get closer, and you start realizing the elite gap remains there all the way up. So anyway, we should probably back out of chat about Einstein field equations, because we'd possibly lose the entire audience. I'm going to pull on a different thread. Something that you mentioned in passing in the previous conversation was around professional services, and this is another area where we've had a different approach. So at SearchPilot, we're often doing professional services. In fact, in most cases, we are helping our customers with their testing programs, and obviously we're coming from very different places, building very different software products. But I'm curious in your decision making, your experiences. Like, was that always a bright line? We're definitely not going to do that. Is that a pragmatic decision that it didn't work for your business model? Like, how did you think about professional services?
Yeah, it was a business model decision for us. So I kind of have come to the realization in the last year that professional services are really an enterprise first feature.
Yep.
Because when you have products like yours, I kind of don't understand how they could work any other way, right? I think you would need them because there's so much that needs to go into the implementation and the onboarding, getting it set up so that it can be successful. And partially, I think this comes to our background. So, being a desktop, certainly a desktop first product, we have thousands of customers, right? We can't. There's no way you can give professional services to all of them when you're charging like 30 quid a month, right? That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so we built our product to be as self-serve friendly as possible, right? So all the stuff I was mentioning before, how do we help our users be able to communicate with their customers with this sort of embedded knowledge base within the product. We've also put lots of things into steering customers. There's loads of documentation. There's loads of like training and all of those sorts of things that help users be successful using the product on their own. And as we've grown, obviously we've got Sitebulb Cloud now, and we have some of these customers that do have much more complicated websites, right? And they do have much more complex needs. And trying to figure out, should we go down the path of we build out professional services arm or not? And basically, it fundamentally came down to what kind of a business do we want to build? And we didn't really want to build that kind of a business. It's not my background, and I don't have like you. I didn't build an agency, right? And what we realize what we're good at is the other thing. We're good at building something that people can be successful from self-serve. And so, really, the direction we want to go with it is to lean into that. So, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have these onboarding calls where we can understand what the customer's problems is and build solutions that are going to help them self-serve rather than essentially do it for them with a professional services arm. And it's helped us understand who are good customers for us and who aren't. And I think that's really valuable knowledge because I didn't realize that before. I'm doing sales calls and sitting there and trying to satisfy everybody. We could do this, we could do that. And realizing that it's probably not the right play for us in terms of the business that we want to build. And that's one of the things that I like most about the build, the SaaS thing, is that you get to build it the way you want to build it, right? And when we come on to sort of brands and values and stuff later, I think that's a really important part to it. So yeah, I'm curious to know that, like, how you think of that perspective versus your experience with the professional services side on your business.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. There's an element of kind of pragmatism our side that it turns out we've built a thing that needs that kind of support. But I think the foundation layer, or like going back to first principles on it, it all comes from that business model that you mentioned. Because we went enterprise first, that led us, that shaped essentially every decision that led from there. That decision was part pragmatism, part dogmatism. Like we wanted to make a big impact to big websites, but also our tech and the whole approach of SEO testing needs websites to be of a certain scale.
Yeah.
Before it's even possible, certainly
because of the statistical significance.
Precisely, and then on top of that, in order to be worth the effort, the uplifts you're going to get need to be worth enough money that it's worth never mind our cost, the focus, the attention, the effort taken to run that program. So that led us in that direction. We did experiment, especially in the early days, with working with some smaller sites and customers where we would, we could still get to statistical significance less often, but sometimes. But even when we did, the value wasn't big enough to justify the effort of the program. A small site getting a single percentage point uplift in organic traffic, for example, wasn't exciting to justify all the effort. And all of those smaller customers churned very quickly.
Mm.
And so we ended up with big customers because we were winning small and big and losing the small ones. And we're like, there's a quicker, easier way here. And I think you mentioned the agency side of things. I think one of the things that worked for us, again, kind of, I guess, founder business model fit, if you like, was that we weren't worried about having about going into the enterprise and having enterprise pricing from day one. And even in the very, very early days of the product, we could see the value that we could bring to some of those larger orgs, and we were prepared to say, there'll be, there's a cost that goes with that, and that let us either bundle some professional services in those very early days or charge for it, but still have it be a small percentage of our revenue and still be a software business, essentially. And I think that's the key that's the kind of thing that unlocks all of this for us. Is we also want to build a software business that is majority software revenue, and to the extent that we have professional services revenue, it's very recurring, it's very attached, it's very it's not a separate professional services consulting wing. It only is helping people run the experimentation programs that they run on our platform, and that we probably have some agency folks listening, and when we were selling the agency and spinning out SearchPilot, there was a moment where there was a discussion about what non-competes would look like, and Duncan and I were like, well, this is going to be an easy conversation because neither of us have any intention of running an agency ever again. Fun though the journey was, no, I wouldn't change the journey. Professional services within an enterprise SaaS business requires a lot of the same skills and DNA, but is a very, very different game. It is much, much easier to have happy customers. It is much, much easier to have high retention. It is much easier to kind of standardize and build out the training and everything else that the team needs. And so it builds off that experience that we had, but it isn't recreating it. And I don't feel like we're getting sucked into the trap of building another agency. It feels very different.
Yeah. So what I think is really interesting as well, though, is so when you mentioned you came into the market essentially comfortable selling at enterprise rates basically from the off, or maybe a bit of experimentation, but basically from the off. And we've kind of come a different direction where we, weren't doing that at all, and now have the capability to offer to enterprise customers. But what you have actually in the crawler market is all of the sort of incumbent cloud crawlers have gone upstream over the last few years. I mean, either they've had funding or they've been acquired by enterprise arms themselves. But basically, all of Botify, Lumar, OnCrawl, Content King, literally all of them have gone to this enterprise model, and they've all gone. They've all ended up with these big professional services arms, which is sort of part of the deal. And they no longer have self-serve at all. You literally can't see a price on any of their websites, and they've all gone in there. And so what we've recognized from our side is we think this is a gap in the market for us to fill, both the mid-market and the sort of, I would suppose, lower end of enterprise is a good fit for us. But what I think is really interesting about it is that thing I mentioned before about who's a good fit and who's a bad fit. And like it only works for us on the enterprise level when they have an internal SEO team,
right,
or they're also working with external consultants who will use the software. And because if they don't, and they need the professional services to sort of feed them recommendations and stuff, that's the bit that we don't offer. And so figuring that out, and how do we make sure we are appealing to the people that are a good fit, who do have the internal teams and will see the value of Sitebulb and will be able to use it themselves, versus the ones that are actually, they do need the professional services, and that's part of an offering that we at the moment
that actually makes them not a good fit for you.
That's a bad fit.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. I think one of the most powerful things we've done in the last ever, but we did it in the last 12 to 18 months, was about really tightening our ideal customer profile definition. And people have probably seen this in the way my language has evolved about it, but the way the marketing material we put out, all this kind of stuff, we still find that there's opportunities to work with quite a broad range of sites, but our ideal profile is that large retailer, large e-commerce, and that focus has helped us in a product sense and in a marketing sense and in a sales sense. And there's something quite interesting. I was always too scared to niche down in the agency days. Distilled worked with a very, very wide range of clients in sizes and in industries and in geographies and in everything else. So I think focus was the last thing that we were any good at. And it was I found it quite nerve-wracking, but the thing that finally tipped me over to be quite restrictive actually in how we define the ideal, the bullseye, was I read an article by the I've forgotten his name now. He founded it's got something Bear. Anyway, I'll have to look it up later and share it on social media. Smart Bear, I think that's the name of his website.
Right.
I can't remember the company he founded, but he talked about this idea that the more tightly you define who you're perfect for, you would think the less you would win in the periphery, in the kind of good fits, but not in the bullseye.
Yeah.
And he said, actually, the interesting thing is the opposite is generally true. The more tightly you aim at the bullseye, the more attractive you become to people who are in the periphery, but have overlapping needs with those ideal customers. So for us, that might be travel, might be real estate, could be jobs, could be media that are not exactly e-com, but they have some properties that overlap with that. And actually, because we're so focused and so perfect for the ideal customer, we become more attractive to those ones than if we'd just gone, we can work with any large website.
Yeah.
And that's kind of somewhat counterintuitive, but you start seeing it in consumer marketing. And once you've kind of seen that, it's one of those things that it pops up all over the place. And like the more you can be brave and focused, the better that seems to work out.
I'm going to have to look out for that now. But that does make a lot of sense. It's a really interesting way to think about that. And I myself have found it much easier to almost sometimes say no, right? Like, I refused I refused to do a demo for someone the other day because I was like, this isn't a good fit. And
Right.
I don't your time's important, my time's important.
100%.
I know this isn't going to go anywhere, and this company's a good fit for you, this company's a good fit for you, this company's a good fit for you, but we're not. And it's only really through both experience and understanding your customers, and I think that if the central thread of everything we've talked about today is value, right? Where you have value and how that is defined, and when the things that you offer will not offer sufficient value to the prospect.
Yeah, and I think that attitude also serves you well in the long run. Somebody might be briefly frustrated that they couldn't have the demo they thought they wanted, but actually as they think about it and then they find a good vendor who's a good fit for them, they think highly of you in the long run. And I think that there's something also very values aligned, frankly, of just being able to say, well, like, we're not going to sell you something if we don't think we can be highly valuable to you. Maybe you've got time for like one or two topics. We've got quite a long way without really talking about AI. You mentioned it in the jobs to be done research context, but not so much in how it's changing everything about how people use the web, how people are discovering things. What if the users of our SaaS tools are agents? And then never mind the GEO side of things. How's that sitting with you? What are you thinking about? What are you worrying about? What are you excited by?
I'm mostly excited. I think I'm quite an optimist in general. So I don't tend to worry too much about things, certainly that we can't control, but I like to be prepared, right? So I'm mostly excited, and I think for me, for a self-serve product like Sitebulb, I think AI access to a product like ours is going to become table stakes, right? It's going to become, you have to have this, and it's at what level and in what ways you enable this. I like I have in the last few months, even my own internal adoption of AI has just
Skyrocketed.
spiraled. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
skyrocketed, and I think you need. I think everyone needs a point where it clicks and you go, oh, I can do this. Oh, I can do
Hmm.
that. I can do that. And like when that starts to trip into like what can we do with SEO tools and the data that you get from SEO tools, I think to some extent we need to be careful, because a tool like Sitebulb collects a phenomenal amount of data, right? And when we're crawling 20 million page websites and collecting, 300 columns of data of variable length for
Hmm.
each of them, that's just your URLs, right? The links that go into the billions, that can get really dangerous because you can't just feed all that to an AI going, go wild, right?
Yeah.
You will end up, hitting context window limits, and hallucinations will start, and you'll eat up every single credit you paid for, all of that sort of stuff. So there's lots of potential pitfalls with it, but I think on a base level, um, giving users access to interrogate data and do things with it within, whether it's Claude that they use or ChatGPT or whatever they do, I think is going to become something that everybody's going to expect within, I don't know exactly the timeline on it, probably 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm excited about what that opens up, really.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have the same kind of optimism bias, I think, and I think I'm slightly older than you, but that having kind of seen the growth of the internet and the web in in our formative years, and then seeing that, I feel like there's a lot of parallels with the kind of bit of skepticism, bit of excitement, bit of unknown, bit of whatever. And well, anyway, that one worked out okay. So let's see how this one goes, and hopefully the web will continue being a thing. I think both of us have a kind of vested
Definitely a
interest in that.
vested interest in that, yeah. As long as websites are still something that people want to go on,
Something visits, yeah,
yeah, something visits, whether it's an agent or a person or whatever. Um, yeah, hopefully that still means we both keep a business.
exactly. We're definitely fans of the URL in
And of the URL, yeah.
in both our houses. Okay, final thing then is we kind of teased it earlier, but one of the things that I've most enjoyed seeing you building your business is some of the tone of voice and the way that you're obviously having fun with doing bits of it. As I said earlier, if folks haven't checked out your release notes, that they're a work of art. I think it's genuinely some kind of performance art going on in there, and there's something authentic, and there's something, but at the same time, I feel like there's something deliberate going on,
Mhm.
and so I'd love to just hear your explanation of like what's going on. How did that happen, and how do you how do you do it well? How do you do it badly? What have you had any missteps? How's it working for you?
Yeah, so the release notes in their formation were essentially a challenge from Gareth to be to not just do the same old boring thing that everybody does, which is performance updates and fixes,
Bug
right? So that's
fixes,
what
right?
almost every single release note that anyone's ever written says. And I kind of took this as the challenge at the time. How do I make this something that people would want to read?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I started using it as an opportunity to explain what was going on in terms of like what, let's say it was a bug fix. What was the issue? And what did that look like to someone? And
Mm-hmm.
then what did we fix and what the outcome was? And so explaining it in a language that they would understand was primarily what I was trying to do. But in order to make it interesting and fun, I would put personalities in there, I would put characters in there, I would use swear words, I would use anecdotes, I would use stories, pop culture references, anything. Like there's a whole Game of Thrones, I don't know what it is, like version 4 or version 5 of Sitebulb, was heavily when I was rewatching Game of Thrones before the final season. So there's loads of that stuff in there on that one, and it's like a lot of it is just what like piqued interest to me at the time. And what I think has come out of it, and I suppose what I ended up honing over time, was a way to embed transparency within Sitebulb. And
Mhm.
I think if we think now about how do we all keep our jobs, and like what things can AI replace and what it can't replace this, what we're doing right now, right? It can't replace the the trust that our customers have in us, that they've developed over the years. And trust is not something that you just get, right? You
Mhm.
earn it. And one of the ways in which I think we've been able to earn trust in people is by being completely transparent. And we have fucked things up, and we literally came up and said we fucked this up. I have put those words on paper on a
Mhm.
number of occasions, and we are really sorry. We deeply care. This is the solution we've put out there, and that sort of communication we've tried to embed throughout the organization. So if we have to talk directly to customers or if we have to email them, respond, we've always just tried to keep that. And ultimately, it comes down to values and um, you know, how do we communicate our values? And the release notes have been a way for me to go, I can express how we as a company feel about these things. And, I do always try and make them fun, because I don't think that we're not dealing with, medical disasters here. Like there's nothing that should be that important. And
Mhm.
hopefully everybody can, appreciate and take things with that kind of perspective. So yeah, there has been something like quite intentional going on. I don't think it was that at the beginning, but as people, I got so much positive feedback about them. People realized people enjoyed them. It made me want to do them more and do a better job of them. And so that's probably how I'd sum up where it's come from, and also how I think it applies to how you build brand and how you make things that are difficult to fake. And
Yeah.
when I see you on stage, that's really difficult to fake, right? You can't
Mhm.
you can't replace, oh, here's a new version of SearchPilot that someone's just spun up, built using Claude overnight, right? Because they can't do that other bit as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the bit that we need to protect and make sure we're continuing to share and continue to do stuff like this, and to show to people that um, we do know what we're talking about, and all of this stuff has a place, and it has somewhere to go.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something related to the ICP conversation actually, of like the people talk about how, the internet's a really big place, and the more that you show the uniqueness of your interests or your personality or your quirks or whatever else, the more you'll find that there are, there's not 10 people or 1,000 people. There's millions of people who that is kind of, I was going to say, uniquely attracted to. Obviously, it's not
It
unique, but
resonates with, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of hard to get your head around what happens when there are billions of people using the internet, and how niche you can go and have, a combination of Einstein field equations and Game of Thrones, and yet there'll be an audience out there that's into that. And I think I just need to. I definitely feel like I need to keep reminding myself that actually following your own passions and interests, and it's the only way to do that, right? You can't fake this stuff,
Yeah.
but also it pays off, because then you find other people who you find interesting and who find you interesting and or funny or whatever. And that's all good. And it's probably a good place to end. I think a very optimistic but also human note, which is fun. So thank you for taking the time today. Really appreciate it. Hopefully the audience appreciates it as well. Where should people find you if they want to follow along with other ramblings or thoughts?
More ramblings can be found on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
That's mainly where I hang out these days. It used to be Twitter, but unfortunately not so
Sadness.
much anymore. And yeah, you can go and find the release notes on the website. There's literally archives of the old ones. If anyone wants to dig back, there's thousands and thousands of words of my, you know, some of it is just drivel, but there's
I
some
definitely
fun
feel like
stuff
we should be
there as
feeding
well.
this into a context window and looking for the all-time highlights. So yeah, hopefully somebody can tag us in a social post where they dug out some old gems. Anyway, Patrick, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.